a bit before 7. Yep, so hopefully you've all seen that flash up now. And I've got to say got it too. So we're aiming to finish a bit before 7, and we'll have a short kind of comfort break in the middle. Right, back to the event. Really quickly, for those of you that don't know STAR, we're a national network, a national student network set up 25 years ago, and with the aim of making the UK a welcoming place for refugees. And we do that by volunteering, by campaigning, and by changing minds. So obviously this event is open to the public, so there's going to be some stars here and lots of other people who aren't, which is amazing. And this event is part of the National Week of Action against the Anti-Refugee Bill. There are loads of brilliant events going on up and down the UK. So do check out what's happening near you and go along and show your support. Really quickly, and I'm going to mention it again at the end, but there are rallies tomorrow in London, Bradford, Coventry, Glasgow, Lancaster, Penrith and Stoke-on-Trent. There's one in Bristol on the 21st and Manchester and Southampton on the 23rd. There's also other stuff going on, and we're going to share that link with you in the chat. We've also had kind of some great stuff happening already. For example, our Sussex Star Group and Sanctuary-on-Sea in Brighton did kind of a huge orange heart on the beach, where there's a great video of that we'll share too. So tonight, we've brought together some really great speakers to get you up to speed on exactly what the Nationality and Borders Bill will mean for people seeking asylum in the UK and what we can do to stop it. And after the panel, we're going to run a quick and practical how to lobby your MP workshop. So please do stick around for that. And just quickly before we begin, want to recognise that this is obviously a really difficult week for MPs with the tragic death of Sir David Amess MP. He was someone who championed the rights of child refugees and family reunion. And just to kind of say at this point that our thoughts are obviously with his family and friends, and kind of, yeah, just recognising that it is a really difficult week for MPs. So I'm going to now pass you on to the chair of the panel, Michael Darko. He'll be taking it away from here. Michael is a human rights campaigner, an expert by experience on detention in the UK, and a STAR Equal Access activist. He's currently studying psychosocial studies at Goldsmiths and is co-president of Goldsmiths STAR. He's also on the board of trustees at AVID and a council member of the Pan-African Movement. So I'm going to pass on to Michael, and Michael's going to introduce you to our great array of speakers this evening. So yeah, just passing on to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Emily. Welcome, everybody. It was a lovely music at the background. If you happen to quote it, I was about to get in a groove and dancing. I hope you're bringing a similar energy. I'm certainly feeling the energy of this space. So we have some fantastic speakers for you this evening. Two of whom are, as Emily mentioned, current situation going on at Parliament. Our MPs are joining us late, so when they do turn up, I'll let you all know. Our first speaker will be Andrea Vukovic, the co-director of Asylum Matters. Andrea is, she leads the team of regional campaigners around the UK to campaign for positive change on asylum policy and practice. Previously, she's worked in advocacy and campaigning roles in conflict and humanitarian issues. She holds a BA in Human Rights from the University of Bologna in Italy and a master's in comparative politics from London School of Economics. If you would like to give us a wave, Andrea. Thank you. And our second speaker will be Belle Ribeiro, Adi, who is not here with us at the minute. She's the MP for Streatham. I won't go too much about it, but we are counting on her expertise that she's bringing from Parliament. She's been MP for Streatham since 2019. She's spoken out against the Nationality and Borders Bill. We also have Caitlin Boswell, who is the policy and advocacy advisor JCWI. And I think we've met our paths has crossed before. She's very fantastic. Her roles at JCWI is leading the campaigning for European citizens' rights, and now work across the campaigning areas, including the Nationality and Borders Bill. She recently gave evidence to committee stage at the bill prior to her work with migrant women affected by the criminal justice of immigration detention in the UK, and also LGBTQ matters. If you'd like to give us a wave, that'd be great, Caitlin. We would then have Inasera, who I will bring her up to also introduce herself before she speaks. She is the member of the Voices Network, a very fantastic organization, a collective of refugees and people seeking asylum in the UK on issues that affect them. She is what we call an expert by experience. And for over the past 2 years now, she has been waiting for a decision on the asylum claim, originally from the Sudan, experienced many challenges of separation. She's a pharmacist by profession, and a community organizer. In organizations in the northeast of London, northeast of the country, is that right? Yeah, to work to reform the policy formulations of the UK. Thank you very much for joining us also. And Paul Blomfield will also be joining us. And I know Paul, he's always on time. As I just mentioned his name, he just turned up. Paul is a fantastic ally to have on this course. Elected as an MP for Sheffield back in 2010. He's a member of the Nationality and Borders Bill committee. And he's spoken out in Parliament about the bill, saying that it makes pathways to refugees more difficult and dangerous for the most desperate. He's also chair of the and founder of the APPG on students, and co-host the APG on international students, and secretary of the APGG on universities. Paul also supported many of my personal campaigns over the years. I'll go straight into the questions, and then I'll let this flow. But again, please don't forget to write in any questions that may come up for you in the text box provided. So my first question I will put to Andrea, and is that, could you what is this bill, and why isn't it fit for purpose? How would this bill impact the lives of refugees and people seeking asylum in the UK in general?
Great. Okay. Thanks so much, Michael, for the introduction, and to Star for inviting me to join. Yeah. So just by way of background, this Nationality and Borders Bill, which campaigners have dubbed the anti-refugee bill, because that is very much what it is, very much represents the kind of single biggest threat to the right to claim asylum that we faced in decades. It's proposing a major shakeup of the asylum system, which we fear is only going to make things worse for vulnerable people who are seeking protection in the UK. For the first time, the bill is proposing a kind of two-tier system of protection, which is based on the journeys that people have made to get to the UK rather than their actual need for protection. So that means that people who claim asylum in the UK who have arrived by a so-called irregular route, which means the back of lorries or in the small boats that are crossing the channel, will be punished, even though those routes are often the only means that they have to actually get to the UK and to claim protection here. Those people will be criminalized and threatened with deportation. Their claims will be defined as inadmissible because they will have traveled to a kind of safe third country to reach the UK, such as France. The government will try to return those people to the countries that they traveled through, even though it doesn't actually have any returns agreements currently in place with those third countries. And if they haven't been returned after 6 months, people can then enter the asylum system. In In the meantime, people will be warehoused in these large reception centers. We don't have a great amount of detail of what these actually look like, but given our experience of working with people in institutional accommodation, including hotels and military barracks, we can assume that they won't be suitable for vulnerable people, especially for families with children. The bill also includes mention of offshore processing sites, much like the infamous camps off the coasts of Australia, which have been criticized for, of course, the widespread human rights abuses, and obviously have come at huge human cost, but also financial cost in terms of running those sites. And finally, if someone does get refugee protection after having arrived via an irregular route under this new bill, they'll be given a new kind of precarious type of temporary status, which means that they'll be threatened with deportation every 30 months and won't have the opportunity to reunite with their families. So all this is really disastrous for people in the asylum system. It will separate families, lead to more dangerous journeys, because while the government is claiming in the bill that it's going to prioritize safe and legal routes for people to come to the UK, it actually makes no commitment to additional resettlement places, for example, or to expanding other safe and legal routes, such as family reunion. So people will have no choice but to come via irregular routes. It's going to create even longer delays and kind of backlogs in the asylum system, which are already at historic levels, by building this kind of additional 6-month delay into the process. It will result in greater poverty. People will be forced to wait in limbo for even longer for a decision on their claim, banned from working and forced onto really low levels of support, less than £6 a day, while they're waiting for a decision. And then finally, with limited leave that's offered to people who do actually get refugee status, it'll be much harder for them to rebuild their lives, to find jobs, and to unite with their loved ones. So all that is just to say that we're strongly opposed to this bill. Unfortunately, it will most likely go through Parliament, given the majority that the current Conservative government has. But it's really important that we show as much opposition as possible as a sector and with our allies, to lay the groundwork for repealing future anti-refugee policies once this bill passes, and to mitigate the worst effects.
Thank you very much. Over the years, what I see, all these issues that you fantastically laid out for us already exist. But my understanding is that all these issues are going to get much worse than it currently is. So my question is that policies after policies are getting worse and worse. What can we do to stop this? Because it's not just about stopping this bill. It's about what can we do to make sure that the trajectory of immigration policies are cut off, essentially, because these are human lives. And I'll put that to all the panelists.
Caitlin, go ahead.
Waiting there. Yeah, I mean, I would kind of echo what Andrea has said, in that it is important for us to recognise the majority that the current government does have, and that the ability to kind of completely stop the bill is a very difficult challenge. But there is still lots that people can do. At the moment, the bill is going through Parliament, and MPs have the opportunity to put forward amendments to change particularly sort of worrying parts of the bill. So I would encourage everyone to write to their local MP and ask them and urge them to oppose the bill. You can explain sort of the main reasons, if you have time, that you're worried about the bill. JCWI has a briefing that outlines our biggest concerns about it, which Andrea kind of helpfully summarised. But mainly that this bill does and will break international law. It puts asylum seekers' lives at risk. It will further criminalise asylum seekers simply for exercising their legal right to seek refuge. And so there's big reasons that people can kind of put to their MP, urge them to oppose it. Something more kind of immediate is that there is a big rally taking place tomorrow outside Parliament for those based in London, and JCWI has a tool on our website, which you can use that as like a template to write to your MP, ask them to come along to the rally. come along yourselves. I'll post that in the chat as well. But I would say that kind of at a time when things can feel quite hopeless in government, it's important to remember that there can be resistance outside of Parliament as well. Like, everyone here is a member of STAR, so you've already taken that step of trying to kind of build community and resistance locally as well. And I would encourage people to get out and do that wherever they can, whether that's through conversation classes, through engaging, mentoring, or just kind of meeting migrants and refugees in your local area. Is more important than ever to do that now, as we're seeing kind of the rise of the far right and things like that, and the hateful narratives that are coming out in the media. Yeah, so that's what I would say on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'll actually, my next question, I'll also open it up, but Paul, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, I just thanks Michael, thanks for convening this. It's great to see so many people interested in the discussion about how we resist the appalling provisions of this bill. I mean, in addition to the points that Andrea and Caitlin have made, I mean, there are a number of other aspects of it which are of deep concern. The way that it, under the section on maritime enforcement, legitimizes pushback of actually border forces turning boats back in the channel, which is a practice that they are trying to copy from the Australians, and which has been open to very serious concern and challenge there. It reduces the a number of entitlements in terms of legal process, which I know that Caitlin and Andrea and other organisations working in the field are very worried about. Crucially, to my mind, and I've talked to Women for Refugee Women about this, it reduces the credibility of applicants and the weight of evidence where full information is not made available at the outset of an application process. And I think in that it completely fails to understand the journey that many people have taken to reach our shores through desperation, and have faced traumatic experience during that process. And trauma often kind of holds back people making full, sharing full information about their situation, and when they're making additional applications. And what this bill does is said, well, if you don't share all the traumatic details of behind your application at the first stage, we will diminish your credibility as an applicant and deliberately reduce the weight of the evidence. So there's some really kind of appalling stuff in here. I think we also need to recognise that on some of the areas, I mean, Andrea mentioned offshore processing. The government probably know that they can't do this. They haven't got an international partner. There's not another country willing to sign up to this. And in a sense, it kind of defines some of the terrain in which we challenge the bill, because there is a deep duplicity in what the government are trying to do. They are pitching to be tough in terms of the headlines that they're trying to get in the Daily Mail and elsewhere. But actually, they know they won't be able to do some of the things that are in this bill. And part of the basis on which you might challenge it with MPs who are not instinctively sympathetic is to point out that it will not achieve the objectives that it claims to do. And the objectives that the government claim are ones that we would all share. They are about the big headline is reducing dangerous crossings across the channel. Well, we'd all agree to that. The question is, do the measures in this bill actually achieve that? No, they don't. By narrowing opportunities, they're more likely to increase crossings rather than diminish them. So I think, you know, one of the things we're trying to do is to frame our opposition by taking apart the arguments that the government is putting forward, even in its own terms, as well as expressing deep concern about the provisions of the bill in the way that Caitlin and Andrea have. I mean, I've just come from our first day of the Bill Committee. There are 82 pages of amendments that we have tabled, many of them in partnership with JCWI, Asylum Matters and other organisations, where we're going to be pushing and testing the government. But it's true that the way in which this government in particular uses its 80-seat majority doesn't leave a lot of space for compromise. We're going to be pushing them at every stage in the Commons. There will be opportunities to do that in the House of Lords too. And I'm anticipating that they'll face some defeats there, and we'll have the battle coming back to the Commons. But it's hugely important that campaigning is taking place. The event tomorrow as well. But we also need to recognise that this government, probably differently from other conservative, even previous conservative governments, is wanting to frame the debate differently. So that I think even previous conservative administrations might well have been embarrassed to be told by the UN Human Rights Commission that they are operating, their proposals are in contravention of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which is something we all signed up to in the aftermath of the appalling things that happened and the lessons that we learned about refugee movement through the Nazi period and after the Second World War. They would be, previous conservative governments would be embarrassed to be told that by the international community, but there is a degree to which this particular administration and this particular Home Secretary are keen to say, well, kind of bring that on, because we want to be seen to be taking on liberal opinion. We want to be seen to be taking on human rights activists in this territory. So I think the way that we frame our case is hugely important. I'll stop at that point because I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you very much, Paul. And before I'll go to Elkhansaa, I'd like to say that it seems like there's a lot of emphasis being put on the idea of criminality, right? And so by people not traveling through safer routes, you criminalize them. That means you don't have to deal with the applications. Now, part of that already exists. And my question really is that on one hand, the government is trying to not take responsibility for the sign on to the article to protect individuals. It's actually making the situation more dangerous for individuals. We also have to look at, strategically by pushing individuals almost to commit crime in order to survive. Because let's be honest, and I'll bring you in a minute. Let's be honest, if you restrict any individual their right to work, while you have such a long period of time in which the application process can go on for, that without adequate support, I mean, a couple of years ago we started to see some winning by the closure of certain numbers of detention centers. Now we're hearing new ones are going to be built. Now, my question is that, as somebody with a lived experience and also those in your network, what are the feelings and what are you talking about? How do you see this impacting on the individuals whose life is being put to the test by this policy?
Can I just say briefly, Michael? I mean, I think you've put your finger on a really important point, which exposes the hypocrisy of the bill, because you could almost buy an argument about closing down irregular routes if there was an opening up of safe and legal routes. Right. And it's an issue that I've tabled an amendment on. I know there's kind of broad support for, and it might be part of the narrative that you can kind of lobby those people who are, those MPs who are not instinctively sympathetic within the government's party, that actually the hypocrisy of this is that they're saying we'll open up to safe and legal routes at the time at which they are closing down those routes. and driving people to those more desperate options. So I think that's an important area to focus on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here, be privileged to be here in such a great platform. And this is what is the point that I want to add when you ask about what can we do to get involved in changing the pills. So it's very important to have refugees and asylum seekers, to bring them up in different platforms, so that they can give their insights and recommendations, because they should be a stakeholder in these decisions, informing new policies and decisions. So this is a point that I want to add about so like such opportunities like this, for me, like 100 audience that could change the minds of the community. And those people who have no idea about what the asylum system was, and what's the new bills are implementing, and the effect of that on refugees and asylum seekers.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've got a few questions here from the audience. Thank you for sending those questions. The general question is, why is there even an anti-refugee bill? And when I read that out, you can see a smile on my face, because it's an interesting question. And it's also one for Paul to explain a bit more about your role on the committee. But I'll go for the other question first, and then we'll come back to Paul.
I can jump in. I mean, I think Paul sort of started alluding towards some of the justification for the anti-refugee bill, but I think generally when it comes to asylum and migration, government policy making does tend to be kind of underpinned by a belief that a tough approach is going to be better received by the public. They're really concerned about appearing sort of soft touch on migration. I think there's also a belief that more generous policies, a kind of more generous package of support for people who are seeking asylum in the UK, can kind of constitute a pull factor and will actually attract more people to come to the UK. That obviously assumes that refugees are kind of rational economic actors, rather than people who are, of course, forced to flee their homes to search safety. And there's no evidence to support that sort of claim for a pull factor. But I think more generally, the sort of increasing numbers that we've seen of people crossing the channel over the last few months in small boats has provided the government with almost a sort of opportunity to kind of manufacture a crisis and show that they're being really tough on stopping illegal migration, as they call it, and people smuggling. And you've seen lots of sort of chest beating and headline grabbing stunts by this government. The ongoing spat with the French about who's taking these people, can we send them back? As Paul mentioned, the kind of pushbacks that are being talked about of people in the channel. The very visible kind of row with the RNLI crew members who will be criminalized under the Nationality and Borders Bill for saving people who are in the channel. And all of that has kind of helped to build this sense of crisis, that our borders are under threat, that we're being inundated with arrivals. And that's been necessary to kind of provide justification for the Nationality and Borders Bill. But it's really important to kind of look at the statistics, which actually offer a more nuanced picture of what's happening in terms of arrivals. And actually the number of people who are claiming asylum in the UK at the moment is low. I think it's about 24% decrease compared to previous years. But I guess there's been this sort of perfect storm of increase of people who are arriving via the channel, again because of a lack of safe and legal routes, poor Home Office planning, a record backlog of cases, I think close to 120,000 pending cases in the asylum system, and then fewer people who are moving on from the asylum system because of coronavirus. And that's created this impression that we're sort of being overwhelmed. And all of that has created the sort of kind of necessary context and justification for the Borders Bill and the two-tier system.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Paul, if I can go back to you again, but also I wanted to kind of say that it seems like the UK and France in particular has got this very nice system whereby if we look at most of the conflict areas around the world, the question of foreign policy plays a huge part on this issue. But often we don't even mention foreign policy when we're talking about refugees, or what I would say the human crisis. Others might call it refugee crisis. In that the UK and France are probably two of the leading arms sellers into conflict areas. Yet they have a system where they're like, okay, these people have to travel through other countries, so they're not our responsibility, right? You don't necessarily have to go to that particular question, but the first question was if you could also explain a bit more about your role on the committee, please.
Okay, well, I'll do that fairly briefly because basically the process of forming legislation within Parliament is that a bill goes through various stages. It was debated in principle on the floor of the House of Commons, and I, together with many other colleagues, spoke against the principle of the bill then. It then goes into committee, at which we give detailed line-by-line consideration for every proposal in the bill. That provides an opportunity both to amend it, but also to kind of test ministers on the thinking behind their bill. Today we were discussing a relatively uncontroversial section which is trying to remedy historic anomalies on nationality for people from British overseas territories. But there's one part of the bill which is giving the Home Secretary more discretion over stateless minors and their access to nationality. And we were using the opportunity to press the immigration minister who's leading on the bill in committee for the justification for that particular legislation, which will diminish rights. And he struggled to do that, and in the end he had to agree to write to us because he couldn't provide answers in the committee. So committee is an opportunity to amend, which is limited because there are 16 MPs on the committee. They're chosen by the balance in the House of Commons. That means that there are 9 Conservatives, there are 5 of us from the Labour Party, and there are 2 colleagues from the SNP with whom we're working very closely. Then when it will be in committee for 3 weeks. We've already had 1 week of evidence giving where experts came along to give their critique of the bill, but also from the government side their support for it. We, for example, had the Australian High Commissioner come and give evidence about his views on the wonders of their system, which a number of us sought to challenge. It will then go back to the House of Commons at what's called report stage, where there is a further opportunity to amend it from other MPs, and there is an opportunity to build coalition. So there's a very interesting split developing within the Conservative Party, for example, on the right to work, where this is something a number of us have championed for some time, including some Conservative colleagues, and there now seems to be a growing groundswell on that. And it's quite important to reference that in the context of public opinion as well, because I think Andrea explained the context of the bill extremely well. From the way that the government see it, but there's an assumption that public opinion is always hostile on these issues, and it's not. If you test public opinion, for example, on the right to work, there is a groundswell of support for asylum seekers to be granted the right to work. So there are opportunities when it goes back to the Commons. It then goes back to the House of Lords, back to the Commons again before it becomes law. So I hope that gives some brief insight into the process.
Yeah, there's quite a few questions coming in for you, Paul. But I'm going to quickly go to Elkhansaa. As a representative of the Voices Network, what do your members want to say to this bill in particular, or to government?
Okay, as a representative for asylum seekers and refugees and hundreds of asylum seekers and refugees and as a member of Voice Network, I would like to say that the system is failing us in so many different ways. And this should be the aspect that should be addressing rather than making things more difficult for asylum seekers. I would like just to highlight how the system fails us and the gaps and the failure that the system do for us. It fails us in so many different ways. I try to do that briefly. It fails us in delayed decisions and interviews, and this could affect asylum seekers and refugees in 3 different ways. They can affect their mental well-being. It can affect them in terms of family reunion, because it's having a backlog like 3-4 years waiting for an interview or for a decision. That will put you, if you are a mother or a parent, you could have your children get a bit beyond 18 years old and they will not be allowed to reunite with their families. So we all know that having a 19 years old is still a child in your eyes. And on the other hand, children being grown up away from their parents, that will affect their mental well-being, and for both parents with feeling this guilt of leaving their children away, and the children that their parents has abandoned them. They're not considering this human part. The system fails us in right to work. And this issue has been raised. So we have been now obligated to be seen as burden and dependent, though so many of the refugees has potentials that they could be an asset rather than a burden. They could utilize these potentials and to support themselves and to provide something for the community instead of being a burden. The system fails us in so many different ways. The limited chances of education and work, and also the policies are really cruel and inhumane, and they treat people and dealing with them with great suspicion and tremendous lack of trust. And as Paul mentioned, you have always been asked to prove anything that you said with evidence, and you have been through a long journey, that difficult journey. You don't have the access to these kind of documents or requirements. Also, it fails us when you're being refused. If your claim is being refused, you will be destituted. You don't know where to go and what and whom to support you. So a lot of refugees after that just live on charities and community organization, and this was really a challenge, especially in the COVID and pandemic, because there's no regular drop-in and stuff like that. So so we need a system to be reformed, to make it fairer and to make it more humane. And because this bill is going to do more harm rather than good. And it will not address the purpose of it. It is not going to diminish the number of people who are coming through these dangerous routes. Actually, it will make it create more dangerous routes.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Is there really such a thing as an illegal route? Because the purpose of setting out to travel is to reach the destination. However way you get to the destination, it doesn't really matter as long as you get to the destination. So when we say illegal route, I'm finding it a little bit, because we've used it so many times, it's becoming the norm, and I'm finding a bit like we have international relations, students and politics students in the room. I would like us to kind of start thinking about, what do we mean an illegal route? Yeah, if anyone wants to respond to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Michael, because the Refugee Convention sets out that you have a legal right to seek asylum, and that one's mode of travel should never have a bearing on whether or not they're granted asylum. So there is no such thing. But the UK government is intent on criminalising those journeys. And I think it's really important that we make that distinction. So, and Paul kind of mentioned that the UN had come out in opposition to this bill because it will criminalise asylum seekers simply for making those journeys, whilst at the same time the number of safe and legal routes available are very, very limited. The number of spaces available, for example, on the resettlement scheme, we know that it's a tiny minority, a tiny fraction of asylum seekers who actually come in through one of these schemes. The vast majority of people are making dangerous journeys by boat or by road. And I think what this bill does for really, in a really, really big way for probably the first time, is trying to make a legal distinction between what they see as good and bad asylum seekers. So it literally is creating two groups of refugees. If you are lucky enough to get a space on one of the resettlement schemes, you're going to be a group 1 refugee, and you'll be granted automatic indefinite leave to remain. But if you come, as the vast majority do, by another irregular route, then you'll be in group 2 and you get limited leave to remain, no recourse to public funds, very limited family reunification rights. And we know that that's how a lot of women and children then come over. They come and join their family through those routes. So yeah, to answer your question, there is no such thing as an illegal journey, but this bill is trying to criminalise people for exercising their legal right to seek refuge. One of the kind of very specific ways that we can see this as well, I think we've already touched on this, but the bill will criminalise asylum seekers who happen to be the person steering the boat if they're coming over on the channel. And JCWI actually has a client at the moment who's in prison for this reason, that they happen to be the person who's steering the boat. I mean, some of the things coming through from this government would almost be comical if they weren't so worrying, because it's just a ridiculous idea. If you're plonked in the middle of the sea in a small boat, someone is going to have to take on that job of trying to steer you to safety. And people are having to face prison sentences for this. So people are both kind of, the very right to seek asylum is being criminalised, but also people are individually facing prison sentences just for trying to get themselves to safety. So yeah, I think you make a really important point.
Well, this bill then is a hostile environment 2.0, right? Because a large origin of this is basically ramping up the hostile environment policies. Do you think that the current situation with the workforce in the UK and also during the pandemic, I mean, we had to kind of like, the government had to chair a charter flight to bring, I think, 500 Romanians to do certain jobs. Do you think that is a way for another way to use in terms of we know what the public opinion is, well, some of them at least. Is this a way of countering that hostile environment? And also, countries like Germany and France actually take on more refugees than we do here in the UK. Is that true by any chance?
I can come in really briefly just on the right to work point, because Asylum Matters, together with our partners at Refugee Action, we co-lead the Lift the Ban campaign, which is all around giving people seeking asylum the right to work. And yeah, we've obviously noticed there's been quite a bit of discussion off the back of the kind of shortage of labor over the last few weeks. There's this idea of giving asylum seekers the right to work has gained prominence. We've seen Dominic Raab, for example, say he would be open-minded about the idea. We've heard from a number of Conservative MPs as well that they think actually, this doesn't sound too bad in terms of, plugging some of the gaps that we have in terms of current labor force. So we have tried to kind of capitalize on that opportunity. It's been out there in the media. We've released some polling, which, as Paul was mentioning, shows that actually the majority of people do think that giving people seeking asylum the right to work is the right thing to do, and that includes the constituencies of, I think, all of the cabinet ministers as well. well. We have some really nifty kind of GIFs on social media, which actually point out the percentage. And we're talking about, around 70% or more of people kind of agreeing, which really flies in the face of what, a number of Conservative MPs, including some who sit on the Bill Committee, say about the people in my constituency really want to see us taking a tough approach. And actually, this is a slightly easier topic because in some senses it is about fairness. It does align with, Conservative values of moving people away from welfare and into work. And in addition to it being the sort of the right, moral, humane thing to do, you can make a kind of, financial cost saving argument as well about the benefits to our economy. And in particular, in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, and this idea that we need to sort of build back the country, the idea that we would be forcing, thousands of people from, not being able to use their skills and kind of sitting on the sidelines when actually there are doctors and nurses among them, there are engineers and pharmacists, and as Elkhansaa, you've mentioned your sort of career, your profession as well is really just ludicrous. So I think there is an opportunity. There will be an amendment going down to the current bill, and we'll definitely be campaigning in a big way around that. So we're keen to get STAR groups involved and watch this space.
I would just add to that as well. I mean, JCWI fully supports the right to work for all migrants, regardless of their immigration status. And this is one of the things that we're currently campaigning on as well. But I would issue a word of warning around the way that the government is currently trying to kind of plug these skills shortages in ways that are actually very detrimental to migrants. And this is kind of more broadly than just asylum seekers and refugees, but we've seen recently with the HGV drivers crisis and the government offering them a measly 3-month visa, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it's kind of, as one of the Polish truck drivers said, it's treating migrants like a tap that you can turn on and off and quickly come in for 3 months and now you have to go. And there's an increasing number of these very short-term insecure visas that are being rolled out. We've seen them in the agricultural sector as well, and they are not a solution to ending freedom of movement, to restricting people's rights to come to this country, because in reality what they do is they increase the chances of work exploitation, because if a person's right to remain in this country hangs on a visa and a specific work position, then they are more likely to face exploitation at work, but they're also less likely to be able to report it because they fear that they might be asked to leave the country if they can't have that job, things like that. So we want to see rights being increased upwards for all migrants. We don't want to see what we're seeing right now, which is that the kind of really real degradation of rights and people being offered these kind of very temporary insecure work visas.
Yeah, just quickly.
Can I just, Michael, come in on the one other question you raised, because Alan also raised it in the chat, which is this kind of idea that the government are pushing that the UK is extraordinarily and generous in the numbers of refugees that we accept, and it's something I'm going to be speaking on in the Bill Committee. The UNHCR kind of produces fairly comprehensive numbers on this, and it makes the fairly obvious point that it is those countries that are in the front line that take most refugees. So Turkey has something like 3.7 million refugees. Colombia, 1.7 million, primarily from Venezuela, followed by Pakistan, then Uganda, countries that are not well placed to be able to accommodate refugees because of their own challenges, are absolutely in the front line. In the context of Europe, the World Bank has produced some really interesting figures on the percentage of the populations which are refugees. Germany 1.5%, France 0.65%, Netherlands 0.45%, UK 0.19%. We are well behind other countries in the number of refugees that we accept.
There's two things that come up for me in terms of the financial incentive and the bank and the bank. And so I wanted to put a question to you, Paul, and I wanted to ask you if you had any advice on how we can better lobby, conservative MPs to join our course. And I put these because I remember a few years ago, I was trying to get across a Conservative MP who was not actually listening. But when I raised the fact that it costs the same amount of money he pays for his child eating to detain one person, then I had his full attention. Is there some key knowledge that you have for us that also enable us and our students to be able to campaign and lobby these Conservative MPs?
So is that directed at me, Michael?
Yeah, sorry, Paul. Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think that it's going to vary by subject. So, for example, although it's not a central issue in the bill, we will be using the opportunity to open up the discussion around immigration detention and the UK's position as an outlier in having no statutory limit on immigration detention. Now, we've built a fairly broad coalition there, which involves a number of Conservative colleagues. And part of the argument there is about the unacceptability, and there are a number of Conservative colleagues who buy that. But also, it's the cost of the immigration estate. It doesn't make sense. The alliance that Caitlin's talking about, that we're trying to build around the right to work, there are a number of Conservative colleagues who can be pressed on where their constituents are, and obviously Andrea mentioned that too. But also on the kind of the lack of sense in keeping people out of work, unengaged, not contributing, and at a pittance level, provided with some funding, when they could be contributed. So there's a kind of, you just need to think about the arguments in relation to each of the issues that we're trying to take on. On lots of these, so they might want to contribute too.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Anyone? I'll leave the next couple of minutes to kind of draw in your last words for us, please, if you may. I think Elkhansaa, you had your hand up a minute ago. Would you like to speak?
No, I didn't raise up my hands anyway, but yeah. Okay.
I'm just gonna have a look at our timing. I think we are about to run out of time here, but I'm just gonna send a last call out if anyone had any more questions before we let our panelists have a bit of rest. Okay, I've got a question coming in. Oh, by the way, is there an argument against the right to work? You know, what is the argument? The main argument for that?
The argument which Priti Patel makes is, it goes back to the point Andrea was making earlier about pull factor. The things that, so yeah, I'll not develop a bit further than that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I've got a question here. How would you also counter the popular argument that people who have crossed Europe to get to the UK have been through safe countries and should have claimed asylum there?
I think it's important. I mean, this is a question that's asked a lot, and JCWI has actually made a little explainer, very short video of my colleague who got asked this very question whilst giving evidence to the committee, which I'll share. But I think it's really important to kind of point out first and foremost that France do take a large number of people who make these journeys and are seeking refuge. They take, as we've heard, they take more than we take, kind of thinking in terms of numbers per population. So that would be the first kind of point I would make. Secondly, I think it's also people have a lot of different reasons why they might seek refuge in particular countries. We'd be ignoring our kind of colonial past if we weren't acknowledging that there are lots of reasons why people might specifically want to seek refuge in the UK. There might be family links, it might be language links, or things related to that very kind of colonial past and the British Empire. So I think it's kind of to take away the idea that asylum seekers have any agency in where they might choose to seek asylum is really harmful and sort of very patronizing to the people in those positions. But yeah, but kind of also showing some of the stats and just saying, well, actually, no, France, a lot of them do remain in France in the first place. But yeah.
I've got a last question here, and that for me is one that I usually ask first. And is that what is the role private companies like G4S, ERS, what role do they play in these policies, if any?
Yeah, I've seen the question around to what extent do those kind of private providers drive policies like the one in the bill. I mean, I guess one of our concerns about the bill as well is that it could potentially lead to kind of further outsourcing of delivery of various aspects of the asylum support system. So obviously at the moment, asylum housing is delivered and support is delivered by a number of private providers, as you mentioned. Mears, Serco, Clear Springs are among them, and we've had some serious concerns which have been well documented over time about, you know, the ability of private providers to really put the needs of vulnerable people first, given that, of course, they are ultimately there to make a profit. In the current bill, you could see things like the erection of reception centers and the running of those, again, outsourced to private contractors, which again sort of removes that accountability and oversight from the Home Office, which is a serious concern. I mean, to the extent that it's a kind of driving force of the bill, I'm not sure, but it's certainly one of the things we're going to be campaigning against.
Thank you. That's excellent. I'd like to thank my panelists. You've been great. If any of you had any last words, go for it. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Emily. But yeah, I'll just give you a minute.
Thanks very much for chairing, Michael. And yeah, everyone, hope to see some of you who are in London at the rally. My team are based around the country, so we'll be attending various events this week. And more generally, if you can get in touch with your MP, use some of the resources that organizations like Asylum Matters, JCWI, and others have available. It would be really good while the bill is going through Parliament to show that there is really strong opposition to it.
Thank you very much. It's important also for those of you who are on the front line doing this important work, we all do a lot of appreciation, but also to look after your well-being, because we need you. So thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, Michael. Really great chairing there, and thanks so much to all our really brilliant speakers who I think have given us some really good food for thought and some really good kind of ideas about, you know, what action we can all be taking to try and, you know, do as much as we can to stand up against the bill, but also kind of, you know, sort of the best ways that we can do that. I know we've slightly run over, so I'm just going to really quickly take us to the break.